Hello world, I am Sakan, and I'll be your guide for this journey into the world of Japanese stories. We all love stories, whatever the form, going from the news from a friend or from newspaper to more complex fictional stories. They are shared between people all the time, and you probably have at least one type of stories you're fond of. You may like books the most for the tranquility they bring. Alone, in a peaceful place, you can retreat from the outside world and dive into its ocean of words, letting your imagination be the ship. On the other hand, maybe you prefer movies and series, astonishing landscapes you can gaze at, flamboyant characters you can listen to. You can even like games to immerse yourself further into the lore, actually playing a part in it. Or perhaps you'd like to compromise and go for comic books, having both a book and drawing, allowing you to see the story as you read it. As they are popular all over the world, comic books are different depending on where they come from. I'm sure, for example, you know of American comic books, famous for their numerous heroes and villains, from humans to cosmic entities. Well, today, let's talk about their Japanese counterparts, the manga. These years, they have spread all over the world, and as they grow more and more popular, you probably have seen at least one before, even just as a meme. The first manga is considered to be a series of drawings from multiple artists from around the 12th or 13th century. As you can see, manga first designated drawings made on the spot. These, pretty obviously, were not exactly what we'd call manga nowadays, but they set the foundations of the manga history. But a manga is not only about comic books. In other countries, it's not that rare to hear someone call manga a story coming from Japan, even when it's not a book. And while it's a misnomer, it's not exactly wrong, as a manga is usually a part of a whole. There are three forms that usually come first. First, the one closest to a book, the light novel. As the name suggests, it's a novel, so all text. The specificity is that unlike an usual novel, it will not be released as a whole book. Every now and then, a new chapter will be released by the author, so the story can be shared chapter by chapter while being written. Since it's a novel, it relies on the reader's imagination, which is a great way to establish a lore. Also, there are websites specialized in light novels with a lot of readers and sometimes some publishers watching. This way, if a story is popular, the author might end up published. Then there's classical manga we all know about. As I said earlier, it has the advantage to use drawings, allowing the author to actually show what he has in mind, and so give more impact to its story, especially for fights or plot twists. It's not that different from comic books from all around the world, but still has some specific traits. When a lot of comic books have colors, the manga almost never does. It's also read from right to left, but hey, at least it's still top to bottom. And last but not least, the visual novel, also known as VN. This time, don't let the name deceive you, as it's a type of story-based video game. The more basic ones will only offer a story with colorful characters and backgrounds along with nice soundtracks, which is already highly immersive for the player. But The greatest interest is when a VN offers choices. By making the story and relationship with characters depend on the actions of the player, the game involves the player both intellectually and emotionally. There are exceptions, of course, but it usually starts with either of these three formats. If the story becomes popular, it can take many shapes. Anime is equally popular and often follows, as it adds a lot of enjoyable dimensions to a manga. Color, movements, sounds, and voices, all these add another layer. Another thing is the music. Especially openings and endings can become an iconic part of the show. Knowing that, the producers sometimes organize musical contests to find a song for an opening or an ending. And games are not left out. Aside from VN, all kinds of games can be made to enrich the lore with new perspectives. For example, a stealth game could depict thrilling missions where you have to take your time to infiltrate the enemy base, when the manga obviously would only have shown the fights, so to not bore the reader. The lore can also reach reality. As people grow fond of a story, they sometimes wish to get their hand on something more concrete. And that's when goodies appear. Could be plushies or figures of a character or posters of a scene, replica of an object from the story. Well, it can be anything as long as it's related to the story. And on another level, there are themed events or even places reproducing the scenery of a manga. The first that comes to mind is convention, since with the years it's become a popular thing all over the world, even though it's not specific to a particular law usually, it's still a place with a pleasant atmosphere for fans. But something a bit less common are occasions like cafes and parks, focusing on a particular law to bring the story into life. Places like G-World Tokyo, a themed park with attractions designed from Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, or Square Enix cafes selling food and drinks coming from the games really propose something more than just spectating a story. These are all different ways to experience a story, each with a unique perspective and unique traits, which can supplement each other to get the most out of it. But for that, you need story, right? And one of the first things you need to decide is what kind of story it will be. Fantasy, horror, comedy? Well, that's not exactly how it goes in Japan. Sure, these characteristics can apply to a manga, but the most prevalent one is not about the tale, it's about the reader. Even though it's okay to read and like any manga, whoever you are, the industry defines a target audience depending on the story. This is what will be used to categorize the mangas. At first, you're a child, which is said kodomo in Japanese, and so you read kodomo-muke manga, which literally means intended for children. Famous examples are like Hello Kitty or Pokemon. Yep, Pokemon is intended for children. Sorry. There are two main traits to kodomo-muke. First, the main characters will either be children or cute childish characters like Hamtaro in Hamtaro, for the reader to identify with. Second, the scenario will be simple, divided in short adventures with a good moral at the end. An episode of Pokemon, for example. Ash and his friends are doing good, a peaceful situation, when suddenly the Team Rocket steps in. Ash will struggle, but ultimately stops their evil deed, and everything will be perfectly fine in the end. Yeah, the villains may have changed a bit in the last seasons, but what can I say? I'm old. Then you grow up and become either a young girl, which is said shoujo in Japanese, or a young boy, shonen. I know, there is a lot more to genders than boys and girls, but that's not the point here. We're talking about mangas and mangas only. So, shoujo and shonen. These are probably the most famous kind of mangas in the world. On the shoujo side, we'll follow the emphasized life of teenagers, mostly girls, obviously, filled with comedy, drama, and romance. Even though a lot of shoujo revolve around an idealized normal life, sometimes it goes beyond that, with like magical girls. Anyway, the important part is there is a romantic relationship somewhere. And when that's the main theme for shoujo, it can be a shonen theme too, though it'll often revolve a lot more around comedy and fan service, with a male protagonist surrounded by girls falling for him. Aside from that, shonen are usually filled with action. It can be located in a plausible world like Great Teacher Onizuka, who is a teacher in high school but a former member of a gang, or Captain Tsubasa about football, or in a more fantastic one like Dragon Ball or Naruto, with fights involving supernatural powers, or Evangelions involving giant robo fights known as mecha. But the most infamous kind of shonen is called neketsu, a story when the hero constantly finds himself in an overwhelming situation and will have to overcome it by training or with the power of friendship. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. The hero is about to be vanquished. There's some dialogue with his friends, or him thinking about his friends supporting him, or anything related to his friend really. Then he gets a moral boost, turning into a power boost, and end of the villain. Finally, you become a young adult, and then again, mangas are divided between those for young women, josei, and those for young men, seinen. Josei is kind of the future of shoujo. This plot is still about everyday life, but this time the main character is an adult, a woman, and there two paths are ahead. One is fantasizing love or sex. There'll be extravagant stories, sometimes with supernatural events. This path is about exploring a woman's wildest desires. The other is real life. No more idealized stories here. We're talking about difficulties encountered by a woman, being about work or dealing with society's beauty standards, relationships, and we all know it's not always as simple as it should be or taking care of children or elders. As you have to know, in Japan there is a strong sense of responsibility towards elders, especially in their old days. It can be tough, as this is about real hardship, but these mangas can serve as a catharsis for the readers. Seinen, on the other hand, are not really lighter than that. As Josei compared to shoujo, you can still see similarities to shonen in seinen, but with a much darker, more complex plot. Rivalry between gangs, government conspiracies, mafia putsch. There'll be probably subplots, violence, even erotic scenes or more. If you find shonen too childish and you're looking for a manga that wants certain things, like showing you the worst part of life or complex political plots, you might be interested in this. As I said earlier, these are only about target audience, supposed to be more receptive to a type of manga. But I mean, that doesn't stop a boy from liking a shoujo, a girl a shonen, or even an adult to like a kodomomuke. After all, well, while it's a manga for children, I would be surprised if there was no one here liking Pokemon. But aside from these, there is another kind of manga, though, which can tell us a lot about Japanese people when it comes to love and sexuality. The hentai. In the Japanese culture, where politeness exists at its peak, it's only natural to be reserved. Even if things are slowly changing, it's still frowned upon to stand out from the crowd. Moreover, expressing your real opinions or emotions is something you'd rather avoid as a Japanese person. They even have a word for that. Tatemai is what they call this behavior, this mask they put on when socially interacting to hide their true self. And as it may seem cold for a stranger used to being sincere with others, considering the chance of conflict coming from expressing oneself honestly and their extreme sense of politeness, it makes sense for them to behave this way. In this context, you probably guess how restrained relationships and sexuality can be there. And when there is frustration, there's steam to blow off. Hentai, meaning literally perversion, pretty clear, right? Is a kind of manga with literally only one limit. You can't distribute, sell, or publicly display obscene material. And I understand you may be confused right now, but let's take a look at what that really means. This limit, coming from Article 175 of the Criminal Code of Japan, is the source of censorship in all manga showing nudity. The article itself isn't about censoring any content, since Article 21 of the Japanese Constitution prohibits censorship, but it doesn't allow the distribution of content with uncensored nudity, which obviously leads to self-censorship. And sometimes the censorship is really minimalist but still exists, as it allows the author and the publisher to distribute it and display it. As long as you follow this rule, a hentai can be about any kind of perversion. I'm sure there are things in there you wouldn't even have thought were actual kinks. And among all these hentai, there are three main categories. The short one is about a simple original story, sometimes one shot, meaning only one chapter. Time is then not to be wasted. The fan service must come very, very fast. It can also be parodic. Based on a popular manga, the author will make up stories involving usually existing characters, even if sometimes there are new ones, into new situations. This could add to the manga lore by showing another part of the character's life, his romantic relationships, his sexuality, but, well, it's usually not used that way, as you may guess. There can also be hentai with a long, rich story on its own. One may imagine hentai is all about porn, but it can sometimes depict deep lore and complex relationships. Obviously, the story can as easily be far-fetched, but still there are a few examples of hentai being more of a mature manga than just fanservice. Anyway, I'll spare the details about how far hentai can go, but even though it's often considered as just porn, there's more to it than that. Another aspect of the Japanese society we can learn with manga is work. Japanese people have the reputation to be hardworking, and from my perspective, it sometimes seems like an understatement. To illustrate, let's take a look at how a manga is made. First, you need to get published. It may seem like an obvious statement for a book, but it often takes an enormous amount of work from the mangaka. And as you may have guessed, mangaka is what you call the author of manga. The one-shot way would be to enter one of the manga contests held in Japan. The competition will be fierce, of course, but you can participate even from another country, which is a good point, because I'm sure there are people willing to create manga all over the world. On the other hand, the long-term way, which is used by a lot of beginners and really unusual way to start as a mangaka, is to go directly to a publisher. You then get to show your manga to a senior of this field who will review your work and give you honest feedback. No beginner can come with a perfect story, perfect drawing, or anything like that. You are a beginner at first, and so the feedback may be hard to swallow, which is understandable, right? But as testing as this method may prove, a resolved beginner who comes back again and again has the highest chance to succeed. And even though this step is already harsh, that's only the start. Once you get published, if your story is good enough, you may get the Rensai status, which is designating the status when you get published weekly in a magazine. This is a golden ticket, of course, but it comes with two downsides. One, If the manga stops being popular, the series is cancelled. The whole series stops, just like that. And that's a lot of pressure for the mangaka, who needs to produce high quality pages at an incredible pace. Pace which is precisely the second downside. A mangaka having reached the Renstai status has one hell of a weekly schedule. Here are the steps of the process. The days and durations may vary between mangaka, publisher, etc., but that'll give you an idea of how a weekly manga is made. First, you'll take a few days to prepare the next chapter, thinking of the plot and drafting are the basics, but not all. The mangaka may explore the setting and take pictures to get new ideas of backgrounds. They also could read fashion magazines to decide on the characters' clothes. It's actually a big part of the process, as that's when the mangaka's creativity is gonna take shape. Second, when everything is ready, especially the mangaka, it's time to start making what's called the nemu. The nemu is similar to a storyboard in some ways. This is a rough sketch of the next chapter to be released. It's a critical part because it's a step where you decide structure of this chapter, which is usually around 20 pages long. Of course, you need to decide on the plot, character involved, dialogues. This is the rough material, but then you need to refine it. The layout is how you present your story to the reader. As for a storyboard, you need to think of every panel as a cinema shot, but there's even more to it. You can involve the very pages into your plot. Your character splits an object in half with a sword, then do the same to the panel and split it in half. You want to create suspense? Put the triggering event on the left page, so the reader will have to turn the page to know what follows. And obviously, in the case of a manga surprisingly read from left to right, you'd have to put it on the right page. Yes. With these tricks in mind, your chapter will be ready to be drawn. Then you'll need to meet the publishers, once a week, because you need their validation about the name, the scenario, the plot of the week. Then you finish the name, and it's time to go to the final version of the chapter. You have to draw what's called the genko. When the nemu was more about preparations of the story, of the characters, the dialogues, of the background, the genko is only about drawing. And when I say only, there's still a lot of work to do. That's why a mangaka will usually hire assistants, some having up to 10 people to help them every week. Each assistant being an aspiring mangaka and trying to be published themselves. If they reach a Rensai status, they will usually leave the mangaka to become an accomplished mangaka on their own. Well, to draw a manga page, there are a few tasks to achieve, and the mangaka will usually split them between his assistant and himself, depending on each person's specialty and abilities, though he will more likely keep the character design to himself. First, you need to ink the characters. That's a step called karapen and consists of inking the strokes and filling the black areas on the drawing. That's also when you add dialogues and text to the panel. Then comes the background. Buildings, furniture, background characters, events. The more details, the more lively it'll seem. And when everything is drawn, you'll have to feel tones. That's when you add shadows and light to the panels. It's about details, but it's essential to give depth to a drawing. Finally, not that far from the tones, you'll add patterns. Using dots, squares, or other shapes, you'll create another type of tones which will help setting up an atmosphere. Genko will usually take a few days to be done, like 2 to 3, so it's not rare for the mangaka to go back to the first step, thinking of the next chapter, while the assistants work on the last details of the Genko. As you can see, being a professional mangaka is not by any means an easy task, as you have a lot to do with a tight schedule, and I didn't even mention anime making process, which involve a lot more people and a lot more steps since this is animated. That leads some professional mangaka to wander into the amazing world of doujinshi, as the contraction of doujin, a circle of people, and zashi, a magazine, literally standing for fanzine, like an amateur magazine, and is used to designate a manga published by the author itself. Even though it's kind of a parallel universe to the classic industry of manga, it's one that has developed quite a lot since the end of the 20th century, especially with the internet. But aside from the internet, you can see how popular the doujinshi are by taking a look at the related conventions. Yeah, conventions again, like the komiketo, also known as comic market, which is the biggest one. There gather an enormous amount of authors and fans, which in the komiketo case means about 35,000 authors and 500,000 of fans. Moreover, in the case of doujinshi, the author is a lot less restricted. The schedule is not as tight, as the deadline is not set by a publisher or an editor, and there is no editorial policy. And even the percentage they get out of the sales is higher. That's why some pros will make doujinshi to take a break from a greatly demanding industry. And yes, ironically, they take a break from work by walking. And so, in the end, what is manga? Strictly speaking, it's a Japanese comic book. Simple, right? But at the same time, it's so much more. The people involved are working really hard with passion, and I think that's something to admire. Don't judge a book by its cover, as they say. Moreover, the lore of manga is a story that's probably gonna take many forms for everyone to enjoy it in many ways. And when the author could talk about it a lot. The story itself tells us a lot about its author and the society and context it was made in. And I guess in the same way, this presentation tells a lot about me. So I hope it doesn't say anything bad. I just hope you learn a thing or two, and more than that, I hope you enjoyed it. So, thank you all for your attention.